This is your World War III update. I've never been more convinced about what's coming than I am right now. I have bet the house, everything I own, all of my investments geared towards this eventuality that I'm about to talk about today. Now, that's just me personally. I've documented my progression in preparedness on the Canadian Prepper channel. If nothing happens, that would be just great. Incidentally, I'll still have a very wholesome and fulfilling life. But myself personally have excessive amounts of conviction about what is going to happen, and day after day it becomes more apparent exactly what is going on. I'm not saying that you should make any financial decisions on the basis of what I'm about to tell you. Do so at your own risk. Yesterday I warned you that when they start talking about preparing for peace, you need to prepare for war. This is well historically documented that prior to any major military engagement between peer competitors on the basis of game theory alone, it is essential, it is necessary and inevitable that countries will eventually clash militarily. Now, with all of the enchanting rhetoric being issued by our political demagogues, be they Vladimir Putin or Donald Trump, it's very easy to be subdued by the notion that these two are in fact friends. Okay, let me ask you, how many friends do you have who will say, hey, come on over, have a drink, here's the red carpet treatment, let's shake hands, let's take some pictures. And then they go behind your back and they fund a bunch of other people to kill you, or they supply the weapons, and those people actually pay them for said weapons to come and kill you. They forward deploy nuclear weapons in the UK. They put their E-6B command nuclear and control plane in the Arctic. They forward deploy nuclear submarines. Okay, they're putting nuclear weapons all throughout Europe. They've been doing that for years. They've been amassing and circulating and strangling the Russian economy from every possible metric. They're arming the Ukrainians with all kinds of long-range weapon systems, but they're your friend. You really think Vladimir Putin believes any of that shit and he's just not going along with this because he doesn't want to panic the population? That's what it's all about. It is all about crowd control. I will be vindicated in this prediction. I don't give a shit if people don't like me because I criticize Trump. I, accepted that a long time ago that, it looks like I'm going to have to increase the IQ of my average viewer if that's the case. Those people will be back, but they probably won't be because they'll be in denial until the bitter end, right? Listen, the main priority at this point in time, preventing chaos, preventing panic, preventing protest, preventing the market from crashing, preventing bank runs and potential draft dodging from getting in the way of war mobilization. Yes, draft dodging. The last thing you want is for your population to know that you're planning on co-signing whatever sort of security guarantee you have in Ukraine, and that might entail actually putting boots on the ground at some point in history. Either way, they're going to have to do some kind of conscription. Maybe they're planning on AI and building up the robot armies before that. Then that would render us all obsolete, and I would actually be more concerned in that potentiality. But understand that what I'm saying is well historically precedented. From Chamberlain and Hitler, who had a peace summit just a year before the war started, to Khrushchev and Nixon, who talked all kinds of pleasantries, in the run-up to the Cold War and throughout the Cold War even, while amassing tens of thousands of nuclear weapons. And today, Trump has the audacity to claim, oh yeah, we're going to talk about nuclear weapons reduction. And people are like, oh, Nate, you shouldn't be against that. It's not that. See, you don't understand what's going on. You don't really understand what's going on. If you believe one word of that shit, right now, they're getting people acclimated to having the military in the streets. First they put them in the streets, then they put guns in their hand. You know that? You know why they do that? Because they want to first prime the population. Putting the guys with guns in the streets right away, that would be, a bridge too far too soon. But first, you get the population used to seeing guys in military uniforms walk around. And hey, some of the street vendors like the fact that the National Guard is deployed in Washington because it's better than crackheads trying to run up on them. People don't even do crack anymore. What am I talking about? Crack, crystal meth. fentanyl, those kind of things, uppers, downers, all arounders. People are happy, but here's the thing. It's a Faustian bargain, folks, because who do you think, is going to leverage that apparatus when this president makes his exit? And this is how government works. It's basically two wings of the same bird. It's one step forward, two steps back, constantly attriting your freedoms. So these levers of power will be leveraged by the next president, whether he's a Democrat or a Republican. And you might not take too kindly to being coerced by a National Guard who's being commandeered by a Democrat who maybe doesn't like the way you look or doesn't like the way you think. So I would just exercise caution that what you're seeing right now in the streets is covert civil defense prep. They don't want to spook the population. They need an excuse. What do you think is going to happen if the shit really hits the fan? They need people with experience who are used to being in civilian uniforms and walking around the American public. And they also need the American public acclimated to that fact. That's why they're deploying these troops to some of the biggest cities. Well, people will say, oh no, it's just about getting crime under control. No, I think it's because they know that people will be compliant. They know where people will likely resist. They know where the protests are going to start. Like democratic cities or not, these tend to be the places where you get grassroots anti-war movements emerging. So if you want to front run that and get ahead of it and make sure that you have cause for locking people up, let's say if they partake in the burning of an American flag, right? This is a great way, easy way to break up anti-war rally. You just throw some provocateurs in there, get them to light an American flag on fire and say we have justification to put the kibosh on the whole thing, get the riot cops to kettle the protesters, even the legitimate ones, and then it's game over for any sort of anti-war resistance. That's what's going to happen. And Trump wanting to rename the Department of Defense to the Department of War, this is actually something that I genuinely respect about Donald Trump, is that he spares us the propagandistic euphemisms of days gone by, where they try to rebrand everything in this exceptionalist terms. We're an interventionist society built on interventionism around the world. I'm pretty sure the hundreds of US military bases in other countries are deserving of such a criticism at this point in time. So it only makes sense that, in fact, instead of calling it the Department of War, you should just call it the Department of Offense, because that's essentially what it is. So props to Donald Trump for doing that much anyways. Now, here's the deal. Mark Carney today comes out, and in addition to giving Ukraine $2 billion fucking dollars, if you look at the derelict conditions of our inner cities here in Canada, you would think it's actually a third world. Like, it's worse than Detroit in some places. You might think, no, Nate, you're exaggerating. No. Go to Regina, Saskatchewan, or some parts of Edmonton, or some parts of Winnipeg, and you will see exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, people from other countries, what are in developing countries, come here, and they are actually appalled at how undeveloped we are and how, we're still living in the 1980s in the better part of this country. But Mark Carney, Mr. Lackluster, insipid Carney, decided to not only follow through with the confiscation of all law-abiding gun owners' firearms while they put people in jail for defending themselves against home intruders, well, he's now decided that they're going to put troops and they're going to jump on this security guarantee thing with the Europeans for no apparent reason, because clearly the Russians do not pose a threat to Canada. That is the dumbest shit I ever heard, to make me believe that the Russians pose a threat to the Canadians. The Russians can barely take the Donbass. You're telling me they're going to come all the way through the Arctic? I mean, if anyone could do it, in fairness, it's the Russians, right? They got the nuclear icebreakers. They could probably do some shit. But their country looks exactly like ours. They got enough tundra and boreal forests and grizzly bears, okay? They're not looking for that. They're looking for a warm water seaport. They don't give a shit about what happens in Canada. Nonetheless, Mr. Carney has said that in addition to taking all your guns and giving them to the Ukrainians, and that's actually what they said on record that they're going to do, little do they know that most of the firearms that they're confiscating are semi-autos. Some of them probably can be modified to become automatics. But the Ukrainians are just going to, laugh at this. They're not going to use those. They're not going to want to put their lives in the hand of an old shitty semi-automatic SKS when they decide to take those next. No, they're going to give them $2 billion, and they're going to actually send our, handful of troops that we have at our disposal over there. We have 60,000 troops in the Canadian military, and I'm pretty sure half of them are, administratives and, support staff. And the other 30,000, we got some good snipers, I guess, they could probably send. They're probably already fighting there, to be brutally honest. But, so this is the crazy world that we live in. Okay, war is peace, peace is war, 1984, and so much more. Long-range strike policy for Ukraine. You know how there's been this scuttlebutt recently about how, the Ukrainians have been disallowed to use, long-range weapon system against Russia? This is you may not have heard, I just take it for granted that some people not be familiar with this, but basically there's rumors that the White House has put a ban on the Ukrainians from using these weapons to do deep strikes inside of Russia for the last 4 months in an attempt to mend some bridges while constantly stabbing Russia in the back, I should add. Well, Zelensky comes out to say today that there are openly no restrictions on ATACMS use inside Russia, and stressed that Ukraine is already attacking Russia with its own long-range weapons without coordinating targets with the United States. Well, in addition to that, the Ukrainians announced today another long-range weapon system, a modified Neptune missile, which has a range of 1,000 kilometers. So this on top of the 3,500 ERAMs that Trump is going to be sending, the Neptune missiles, and the Flamingo intermediate range missile, which is essentially a very long-range continental missile that can touch anywhere inside Russia. And on top of that, they have their drones, which are increasingly becoming more sophisticated, guided using NATO ISR and Starlink satellites that have a range of up to 1,600 kilometers. Now, really, all of this is happening. Well, this phony baloney pomp and pageantry, this fake diplomatic theater is unfolding, and people are buying it, which is incredible to me, because Trump just cannot contain himself. All he would have to do is stick to the playbook and not get into fights with Dmitry Medvedev, who starts threatening the perimeter system in dead hand. All he has to do is not threaten to deploy nuclear submarines and deploy nuclear weapons to the United Kingdom and do every single thing that he does that it's been kinetically antagonistic towards the Russians and just not talk about it. But he can't. He cannot contain himself. So Lindsey Graham today said that Trump is preparing to lift all remaining U.S. constraints, which would formalize what Zelensky suggests is already the case. And Trump said that in 2 weeks, if there's no deal, then severe consequences are going to ensue. So again, it's all bullshit, and I've said this since day one. I was the only one that I know of anyways who stepped out on a limb, with the exception of maybe one or two pundits, okay, who said this in a different way. But I said specifically, he is going to go and he's going to shake Putin's hand, and then it's all downhill from there. That is the final card. That is the Trump card. Every time Trump plays the Trump card, shit hits the fan. Whether it's Kim Jong-un or Vladimir Putin, the outcome is going to be the same. And at this point in time, this jockeying for diplomatic position that we are currently seeing between the White House and Russia is just to appear reasonable, so that when the other side violates the deal, you can blame them and you can have a rally around the flag, patriotic moment. And I think that's what they're looking at, because if you ask me, it's very likely that many people, I'm not saying all, but many people who support Trump would be willing to go to the war with the Russians if they made some super cool looking campaign, like the Russians have been doing with the Z campaign. I'm not sure if they're still using that whole Z thing, but if they were to do something like that, they're trying to do it desperately with Pete Hegseth, but people just aren't buying it. It's a bit too try hard in a lot of ways. If they want it, I could cook them up. Like, I'm talking like Goebbels style propaganda I could sit here and think about this. So the fact that these people are so out of touch that they can't even, like if it was me in charge of the US right now and this strategy to try to bolster their military numbers, it's simple. It's simple. You just make prepping the central focus. You make, kind of like the Cold War thing. I don't know what it was, but there was all kinds of slogans that they had through the Cold War, like, do your part, the whole Victory Gardens thing. Like, you make it about prepping, and you really have to tie people's self-preservation to the outcome. And so if they have an investment in it like that, anyways, I don't want to give them too many ideas, because you could easily do this, but the way they're doing it is all wrong. You got to do it with native advertising. You can't do it with, trying to get G.I. Joe doing push-ups. That's not going to sell anybody anything. You need one of their icons to join. And that's what they don't have. They don't have the people that the young people actually look up to. They need them to join into the fight. You see what I'm saying? And this is where maybe they just can't find somebody. They must know this. They know this Albert Bernays style psychology, this marketing psychology. They've used it in pretty much every respect, but maybe the government is just that inept that they can't even make a good propaganda campaign anymore. Sooner or later, they'll clue into that this is the way they got to go. So I guess when you see, somebody that people look up to, I don't know who do people look up to nowadays, some of these stupid TikTok influencers, when you see them joining up and when prepping for SHTF becomes cool, but when it's intertwined with this militaristic component, this patriotic component, that's when you got to watch out, okay? That's what's coming. This is just common sense. I mean, there's nothing profound about what I'm saying. Now, there was NORAD intercepts in Alaska. Russian Ilyushin 20 Kut reconnaissance aircraft entered the Air Defense Identification Zone on August 20th, 21st, and again on the 24th. So, look, tomorrow I'm going to break it all down. I have this video planned, and it's going to break it all down because you really need to plot the timeline. There's been so much happening. But just think about this, okay? All of these intercepts in Alaska, all this talk about Greenland, command and control centers, the Russians, nuclear icebreakers, Putin threatening that their nuclear submarines have unique capabilities that only they have under the surface there. All of the other data points that I've mentioned, and now you have 3 interceptions within a week, which is an unusual number, even though these interceptions are not entirely uncommon. But you still have people under the incredibly misguided belief that the U.S. and the Russians are going to do business. The business of the U.S. right now is destroying the Russian economy. It's completely gutting and destroying every aspect of their core economic driver, which is oil and gas. Destroying all the infrastructure, destroying all the relationships, destroying the shadow fleet, putting sanctions on their allies. The goal of the U.S. is to tighten the noose on Russia and eventually try to basically dethrone the Kremlin and get rid of Vladimir Putin and install a puppet government. But they have to be very careful because right now they've decided that we're going to allow Europe to arm itself. And this is the angle that most people don't get. You see, there was a risk in the U.S. telling Germany to mobilize. Can you think about what that might be? I think there was something that happened at one point. So the U.S. knows that right now Germany is under occupation. These are not vassals. These states are under occupation. And while it might be useful towards the end of defeating Russia, the United States has to be very careful how much weapons and how strong they allow Europe to be militarily. You see, I don't think, and this is just an unpopular opinion, because I like to think, not that I like to be contrarian, but this is something that might explain what's going on. I actually think that there has been a prevention of Europe from arming from the United States because they don't want them to get too powerful, right? Because if Europe starts to become autonomous and it starts to act in its own interests, and it decides that, hey, maybe we'll take a run at the Russians and we will confiscate all of their stuff, right? And we will be able to benefit and enrich ourselves with all of these natural resources. Look, Russia, Europe together would be unstoppable, would be completely unstoppable. That would be your golden billion. That is what the US doesn't want. So the US wants Europe to be just strong enough that they can fight the Russians, but not strong, not too strong that they get up under the boot heel of US colonial rule. So just something for you to think about, you know? Sorry to go on all these tangents, but this is why you have Europe basically now intent to send $50 billion in military aid this year to Ukraine. Germany themselves are committing over $9 billion over the next 2 years. Financial and security guarantees are under discussion. Norway proposing $8.4 billion, and this, of course, is how the direct war with Russia will start, is with these security guarantees. Because you really think they're going to stop once they get these security guarantees? They're going to have some detente. Maybe there's going to be something signed, but that's the trap that's being laid. Because then they have the casus belli to go to war in a way that doesn't necessarily have to go nuclear, because Article 5 doesn't have to be invoked, because this is going to be a coalition built outside of NATO. That's the whole rub. So then they can have their endless conventional attrition war against the Russians and sacrifice the intermarium states next on the front lines, because they're running out of Ukrainians to scoop up off the streets. Norway committing $8.4 billion. And Zelensky said that essentially they need about $1 billion a month specifically to purchase American weapons. Okay? Trump reiterated that denuclearization is a big aim. Right. Oh, man. People will believe anything. I mean, look, I'm still waiting for the drones. I'm still waiting. I was watching the clip today again where he's like, yeah, the government knows. We're gonna, first day one, I'm going to figure it all. Fort Knox. We're going to figure Epstein, we're going to figure everything out. Peace, day one, 24 hours, we're going to shut down the war. But people still persist. And that's never going to change, right? So all that means is that the stakes get higher and higher. And the purse gets higher and higher. And so, look, if you lack the scruples, you could probably make a lot of money on these plays, but you got to make sure that you have a way to, because honestly, they could crash the whole banking system. They could freeze your accounts. They can make it so that you might have a lot of ones and zeros on the screen, but you have no ways of accessing them. So what you need is stuff. That's what you need right now. If you have an ample amount of disposable income, this is not financial advice. Let me rephrase this, because my lawyer is going to be like, Nate, don't say that. If I had a bunch of zeros and ones on a screen, I'd be doing my darndest to convert that into stuff that would benefit me for when the lights go out, okay? That is real value, but people, we're so invested in it. You don't want something that's going to depreciate, but the great thing, and I've always said this about anything related to survival and preparedness, is that it doesn't depreciate in the same way everything else does. Like a knife is really not going to depreciate. Any wilderness tool, a good backpack. I have an Alice pack from the Vietnam War, okay, that's still in good condition, still is very functional. Freeze-dried food is only going to appreciate in value. It will not only keep pace with inflation, but if they ever do ban meat, like they're talking about doing, or make it harder to come by, that meat is going to triple. It's going to 10x in value if you buy it today. Again, I must speak in the first person. This is what I would do, okay? I'm just saying nothing else, especially things that are tech-related or any other decadent indulgence, is going to yield, the same kind of returns. Everything depreciates it when you drive it off the lot, with the exception of prepping things. Like even a good diesel vehicle is going to depreciate. Yes, a vehicle that a prepper is going to buy, or somebody who is looking for reliability, is going to depreciate less and less. So in many ways, this is why it's antithetical to this Keynesian consumerist capitalist model, because, you know, they want planned obsolescence. They want you to continually have to buy new shit year after year and never be satisfied and own nothing and essentially eat, you know, like the nutrient devoid foods so that you get depressed. So then you have to take the medication and the this and the that and the that and the this, and you're spinning around. And before you know it, you're having a freak out. You're in the middle of the street running around naked, screaming at people. This happens all the time in Hollywood because they just, you know, these people are spiritually, I don't like saying spiritually dead because in many respects they're victims of what we've done, what we've created here. And it's reaching its breaking point. I mean, the end is truly fucking nigh. It is. It just is. And at some point, we have to admit it, that this is, you know, it's game over pretty soon here. I don't know what that's going to look like. People are going to run with that soundbite and say, Nate said the world was going to end again. Look, I deal in probabilities. I don't know when it's going to happen. I don't know what the extent of the crash is going to be. But I know it's coming. And I know we're in for a big Malthusian-style catastrophe. Might not be related to our inability to grow food at scale, but it's going to be related to the unintended consequences of our overdependence on technology. I do believe that much. That doesn't mean I'm going to go all Unabomber in the woods. I'm going to stay here and continue to make videos and narrate the end of days as it unfolds. I would rather do that. Okay, so the Zapad exercises in Belarus. So Lithuanian military intelligence reports up to 30,000 Belarusian servicemen will participate in the Zapad exercises, but estimates suggest it could range, if you include the Russian troops, up to 100 to 150,000. Now, these Zapad exercises, this is one of the primary focus. The Ukrainians are spooked about this because they're going to be doing Orezhnik demonstrations and training, leveraging nuclear missiles, potentially simulating nuclear strikes on the NATO territories. And interestingly, there was a lot of, I think there was a nuclear sniffer plane in and around Gotland Island, which recently had an electrical blackout. That's in the middle of the Baltic Sea. Okay, so there's so much happening, guys, that I can't even get into in these videos, but just understand that they're very concerned that this exercise that's about to kick off in September is going to be the flashpoint for a new major offensive, possibly one coming from the north. So, right now, they're estimating that the numbers are between 100 to 150,000. In the previous Zapad exercises in 2021, that preceded, of course, the Ukraine war, I think there was like 220,000 troops that partook in that one. And in that one, people were quite concerned. Now, I think that took place possibly in the fall, but if it took place before that Biden meeting with Putin, I'll have to look into that because that's an interesting timeline to analyze in and of itself. There are claims that Russia is getting ready to do some big aero attacks. Russia has finished preparations for a large-scale strike campaign against Ukraine's fuel and energy infrastructure, including power generation, gas compressor stations, storage systems, and substations. However, the planned attacks differ from what they did in 2022 and 2023. They're actually going to try to destroy them for good. Okay, this time. They're actually going to go for the jugular. I guess time will tell, and we shall see. Estonia is building a stationary drone wall along its 294-kilometer border with Russia and around major cities, enabling simultaneous detection of hundreds of UAVs. Initial capability budgeted at a measly $20 million. It's going to be heavily EU funded. There's stuff kicking off on the North Korean border that I'm not going to talk about. Australians are kicking out Iranian diplomats because they claim that they're being anti-Semitic. Oh yeah, Israel keeps killing the journalists of Reuters and all these places. I can't even report on that anymore because it's such an injustice what is occurring there that it just pisses me off every time I talk about it. So I can't even talk about it anymore, which is not necessarily the best thing because you don't call attention to the war crimes that are being committed. And Benjamin Netanyahu is 100% a war criminal. That is undeniable at this point in time. It is just, you know, the way that these guys are operating, they're killing journalists and then they say, oh, it was a mistake, knowing full well that it was intentional to discourage any journalist from going there to report what's actually going on, which is a genocide. Okay, it is a new Holocaust that's happening inside the Gaza Strip. There, I said it, period, point blank. I mean, at this point in time, does it really matter? I don't know how much time we have left, so I got to get in God's good graces if the man upstairs actually exists, if you know what I mean. Because I'm an agnostic, but the more time goes on, as I build out this arc, I'm like, what's moving me in this direction? I thought I'd throw a little bone to my Christian viewers out there who keep sending me all these cups with scripture on it and T-shirts and Bibles and books and all that great stuff. Keep sending it my way. Maybe one of these days you'll figure me out. I doubt it though, because I'm too much of a dissident. I'm too recalcitrant to ever be corralled into any sort of institutionalized form of religion. Spirituality, on the other hand, I'm hip to that. We'll see someday. Anyways, the markets are roaring back at all-time highs. Record levels of valuation, bigger than the dot-com bubble. There we are. I mean, what else is there to say? Shit's going to hit the fan. You should probably get ready for it. You should still live your life. And incidentally, if you do choose to live a life of preparedness, you will have a wholesome, fulfilling life nonetheless. Thanks for watching. Gotta go. Bye.